The richest family on Earth is worth $513 billion. They are not on this list. Neither is the second, or the third, or the fourth. 3 of those 4 own countries. The fourth opened a discount store in Arkansas in 1962. Every family in this video was already rich before the Second World War. 10 dynasties, poorest to richest. Number 10. In 1885, a man called Albert Boehringer bought a small factory in a village on the Rhine. 28 employees. He made cream of tartar, baking powder chemistry. That factory is now Boehringer Ingelheim. Annual revenue of roughly 26 billion euros. One of the 20 largest drug companies on the planet, and in 140 years, not one share of it has ever been sold to the public. No stock ticker, no outside investors, no quarterly earnings call, just the family. Estimates of the Boehringer and von Baumbach fortune start around $40 billion and climb from there. I cannot give a precise number, and neither can anybody else, because there is no share price to multiply. Here is how large that family has grown. In 2025, a 19-year-old named Johannes von Baumbach turned up on the global billionaire lists at $5.7 billion, the youngest billionaire in the world. He had not built anything, he had not sold anything. He was born, and a sliver of an inheritance from 1885 was waiting for him. So hold one question all the way to number 1 with me. What makes a fortune survive? Because most of them don't. 90% of family wealth is gone by the 3rd generation, according to the study everyone in private banking quotes. These 10 are the exceptions, and they all did something very specific. Number 9. Basel, Switzerland, 1896. A 28-year-old named Fritz Hoffmann marries a woman called Adele La Roche, bolts her surname onto his, and opens a laboratory. Hoffmann La Roche. Roche. The company synthesized vitamin C for the mass market in the 1930s. It launched Valium in 1963, which went on to become the best-selling prescription drug in the Western world. It made Tamiflu. Today, it is one of the 2 or 3 biggest names in cancer medicine anywhere. The Hoffmann and Oeri descendants are worth somewhere around $47 billion. But look at what they actually kept. The family holding pool controls just over 50% of the voting shares, just over 50.01%. They did not keep most of the money, they kept the last vote. Anyone can buy Roche stock tomorrow morning, nobody can buy Roche. What makes a fortune survive? So far, the same answer twice. Control. Number 8. Munich, the most photographed logo in Germany and 2 of the least photographed people in it. The Quandt story starts in 1883 with a cloth factory, textiles, then batteries, then an industrial empire under Günther Quandt that supplied the German state through both world wars. That period is documented, and it is ugly, and the strange thing is that the study which documented it was commissioned and paid for by the family itself in 2011. Then comes 1959. BMW is nearly finished, losses everywhere. Daimler-Benz is circling with a rescue offer that is really a takeover, and the shareholders' meeting is hours from voting it through. Herbert Quandt, who was legally blind and read his briefing papers through a magnifier held an inch from the page, walks the other way. He buys in. He backs the small car plan everyone else has written off. 6 years later, BMW is profitable. 60 years later, it sells more than 2 million cars a year. Stefan Quandt holds around 23% of BMW. His sister, Suzanne Klatten, holds around 19%. Between them, over 40% of the company, and a combined fortune near $50 billion. They give roughly 1 interview a decade. Suzanne Klatten is the richest woman in Germany, and almost nobody would recognize her standing in an airport queue. And she did something I find remarkable for an heiress worth $26 billion. Early in her career, she worked under a false surname, Kant, not Quandt. 1 letter changed, so that colleagues would have no idea whose daughter she was. That is how she met her husband, an engineer. He did not know either. Number 7. A grocer's shop in Essen opened in 1913 by a miner's wife called Anna Albrecht. Her 2 sons came home from the war and took it over in 1946. Their idea was almost aggressively simple: strip out everything. No frills, no advertising, few brands, low prices. By 1960, they had 300 stores, and then the brothers fell out. Over cigarettes, Theo wanted to sell them at the till. Carl thought it would attract shoplifters, so they split the company in half along a line drawn across Germany, and that is why, to this day, there is an Aldi Nord and an Aldi Süd. Aldi Nord bought Trader Joe's in 1979. The Albrecht heirs are worth around $51 billion, and they are the most reclusive rich family in Europe for a very specific reason. In December 1971, Theo Albrecht was kidnapped outside his own office and held for 17 days. His family paid a ransom of about 7 million marks. Afterwards, he traveled in an armored car, changed his route every single day, and in one of the great footnotes in the history of money, tried to claim the ransom back as a tax-deductible business expense. For the rest of his life, almost no photograph of him existed. What makes a fortune survive? Sometimes being impossible to find. Number 6. Conover, Iowa, 1865. The American Civil War has just ended. A man named William Cargill buys one grain warehouse beside a railway line. That warehouse is now Cargill. Revenue of $154 billion in its 2025 financial year. The largest privately owned company in the United States. It trades grain, salt, beef, cocoa, animal feed, and shipping across 70 countries. Almost any processed food in a Western supermarket has touched their machinery somewhere along the line. Their name is on none of it. They do not sell to shoppers. They sell to the companies that sell to shoppers. The Cargill and MacMillan descendants still own more than 85% of it. About 20 family members, more than a dozen of them are billionaires. Combined, roughly $51.6 billion. In 2025, the company paid its owners a record dividend of about $1.5 billion. 160 years. 6 generations. Not one public share. And there is a family rule I keep thinking about. A born Cargill who wants a job at Cargill has to go and prove themselves at another company first. The inheritance is automatic. The job is not. There is a second rule that matters more. For decades, the family agreed to leave the overwhelming majority of the profit inside the business instead of taking it home. That is how a grain warehouse from 1865 turned into a $154 billion trading empire without ever borrowing from the public. They starved themselves rich. Number 5. North Bay, Ontario, 1931. The Great Depression. A failed farmer and struggling radio parts salesman named Roy Thomson cannot sell radios in a town with no radio station. So he starts a radio station, then a newspaper, then 200 newspapers, then the Times of London and a British peerage and a North Sea oil field. And then his descendants did the thing almost no dynasty manages. They noticed their own industry was dying. The family sold the newspapers, nearly all of them, and they put the money into something far less glamorous and far more valuable. Financial data, legal databases, the boring plumbing that banks and law firms cannot operate without. That business is Thomson Reuters. The family holding company, Woodbridge, still owns roughly 70% of it. The Thomson family is worth about $82 billion. David Thomson, the third Baron Thomson of Fleet, is the richest person in Canada, and he collects paintings by John Constable. So the question sharpens. What makes a fortune survive? Control is not enough on its own. A dynasty also has to be willing to sell the thing its founder loved. Roy Thomson spent his life buying newspapers. His heirs sold them and multiplied the money by more than 10. Number 4. Paris, 1924. A designer with no money and a chemist's formula meets a businessman with a perfume factory. The designer is Coco Chanel. The businessman is Pierre Wertheimer. They sign a deal on the perfume company. Wertheimer takes 70%. Chanel takes 10%. She spent much of the next 30 years trying to get out of that contract. Lawyers, lawsuits, and one attempt during the German occupation to use Nazi racial laws to strip the Jewish Wertheimer family of the business. It failed. The Wertheimers had already moved control to New York, and after the war they came back, and eventually they simply bought the whole house. And the product at the center of all of it was a bottle of perfume launched in 1921. Chanel No. 5. 105 years later, it is still one of the best-selling fragrances ever made, and the company has never once had to publish what it earns. Today, Chanel is entirely owned by the two Wertheimer brothers, Alain and Gérard. Revenue of $18.7 billion in 2024. No stock market listing. No outside shareholders. No obligation to explain a single decision to anyone. When the company wanted to spend more than $1 billion buying up its own suppliers, the tanneries and the silk mills and the button makers, it did not need permission from anybody. Their fortune is around $85.6 billion. And here is the part that fits the pattern. Gerard Wertheimer lives quietly in Switzerland and breeds racehorses. Alain has given a handful of interviews in 40 years, the most famous fashion house in the world, and its owners are effectively anonymous. Now stop for a second, because everything you have heard so far was the warm-up. The bottom 7 families on this list are, together, worth about $330 billion. The top 3, on their own, are worth over $475. This is where the numbers stop behaving like family money and start behaving like national budgets. Number 3. Tacoma, Washington, 1911. A man named Frank Mars, who had polio as a child and learned to make candy in his mother's kitchen, starts a sweet business. It fails. He starts another. That one fails too. In 1923, he makes a chocolate bar with nougat inside, meant to taste like a malted milkshake. The Milky Way. It sells $1 million in its first year. His son Forrest took the idea to Britain, created the Mars bar, and later, watching soldiers in the Spanish Civil War eat chocolate pellets coated in a hard shell so they would not melt, came home and made M&Ms. Melt in your mouth, not in your hand. 1941. Mars today is one of the largest privately held companies on Earth. It bought Wrigley for $23 billion in 2008. In December 2025, it closed a roughly $36 billion purchase of Kellanova, which brought Pringles, Pop-Tarts and Cheez-It into the same family cupboard. And the biggest part of the business is not chocolate at all. It is pets. Royal Canin, Banfield, VCA, Mars is one of the largest veterinary companies in the world. Annual sales of around $50 billion before the Kellanova deal even closed. The Mars family fortune is about $143.4 billion. They have never sold a share. They have never held a press conference of any consequence. Company legend says the family motto is simply not to appear in the newspapers, and for 80 years it worked so well that most people assumed Mars was owned by a faceless corporation. It is owned by 3 or 4 extremely private people. Number 2. Wichita, Kansas. In 1925, an engineer named Fred Koch co-founds a firm that develops a better way of cracking crude oil into petrol. The major American oil companies sue him twice. He goes abroad to find customers and builds refineries wherever he can. His sons turned that into Koch Industries. Revenue in the region of $135 billion. Over 120,000 employees. Pipelines, chemicals, fertilizer, glass, electronics, paper towels, carpet fiber, the padding inside a pair of trainers. Thousands of miles of pipeline and refineries processing hundreds of thousands of barrels of crude oil every day. The family is worth about $150.5 billion. And Charles Koch has spent 60 years refusing absolutely and repeatedly to take the company public. His argument is that a listed company has to answer to shareholders every 90 days, and a private one can think in decades. Whatever anybody thinks of this family, and there are strong opinions in every direction, that specific decision is the reason they are on this list, and thousands of larger, louder companies are not. Which leaves one. Number 1. Paris, 1837. A man called Thierry Hermès opens a workshop making harnesses and bridles for horse-drawn carriages. Not a luxury brand, a leather workshop for the carriage trade. Then the motor car arrives and annihilates the entire industry. So the family took the same stitching, the same leather, the same craftsmen, and started making bags and luggage for people who now traveled by car and by train. In 1956, Grace Kelly used one of those bags to shield her pregnancy from photographers, and it became the Kelly. In 1984, the chief executive sat next to the actress Jane Birkin on a flight, listened to her complain that no bag was big enough, and sketched one on a sick bag. That became the Birkin. Today, a good one at auction can cost more than a house. The Hermès family fortune is $184.5 billion. more than 100 direct heirs, 6 generations, still today run by a family member, Axel Dumas. And the company still behaves like the workshop it started as. One craftsman, one bag, start to finish, stitched by hand with 2 needles and a single thread. Hermès has never used an advertising discount. It has never had a sale. It deliberately makes fewer bags than the world wants, and the shortage is the entire business model. That is the machine Bernard Arnault tried to take, and they very nearly lost all of it, in public, in a single week. In October 2010, Bernard Arnault, the head of LVMH, and at times the richest man alive, telephoned the Hermès family and told them that he had quietly built a stake in their company. 17%. Within weeks, it was 23%. He had assembled it through derivative contracts that legally avoided the disclosure rules. The family had no idea it was happening. They had roughly 2 months to save a 170-year-old house. What they did next is, I think, the single most impressive thing on this entire list. More than 50 family members across dozens of branches, all with their own lawyers, their own tax positions, their own children and grievances, agreed to pool their shares into a single holding company. It is called H51. It locked up just over 50% of Hermès, and it stripped every one of them of the right to sell freely. 50 family members voluntarily took away their own freedom to get rich. In 2 months. Arnault never got the company. The French market regulator later fined LVMH €8 million over the way the stake was concealed, and in 2014, LVMH handed the shares out to its own shareholders and walked away. If a single one of those 50 relatives had said no, Hermès would be a division of somebody else's empire today. Which brings me to the thing this whole list has been circling. Look back at all 10. Boehringer, never listed. Roche, 50.01% of the votes. Cargill, not one public share in 160 years. Chanel, private. Mars, private. Koch, private by absolute refusal. Hermès, locked in a vault called H51. What makes a fortune survive? Not investing skill, not secrecy, although they all have it. The answer is that every family on this list made it impossible for their own descendants to sell. They built a cage around the money, and then they climbed into it. And if you find this kind of thing as strange and as fascinating as I do, subscribe, because I am going next to a family that owns a piece of almost every morning you have ever had, and whose name you have genuinely never heard. Because there is one more test these 10 had to pass to be here. They had to be a family. The single richest inheritance on the planet does not qualify. Françoise Bettencourt-Meyers, the L'Oréal heiress, is worth more than the Thomsons, the Albrechts, and the Cargills, and she is one person, so she is measured on a different list. I will get to her and to the 9 women beside her very soon. And the family everyone expects to top a video like this one. The Rothschilds. 2 centuries of legend, and the honest answer is that the fortune was split so many times across so many branches and countries that they do not appear in the world's 25 richest families at all. The myth outlived the money. It is the exact opposite of everything you just watched. So, next time somebody shows you a rich list, look past the number, look for the lock, subscribe, and stay with me. Because next I am opening the doors on the wealthiest family whose name almost nobody on earth can say out loud. You have eaten their food, you have drunk their coffee. You will not believe how hard they have worked to stay invisible.